Thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. It is certainly my privilege to be here, to have the opportunity to share information not only on vitamin D, but also on its relationship to calcium as these nutrients affect bone health. There we go. This picture puts the problem into some perspective. In Asia, hip fracture rates are rising as rapidly or more rapidly than they are anywhere else in the world. This is because your population is aging. But when you consider the impact of this, there will be a six-fold increase in the number of hip fractures in Asia occurring between the intervals of 1990 and 2050. This has enormous public health ramifications. It behooves us to learn and then to implement what we have learned as regards prevention of the hip fractures. So we will be focusing today on the extent to which calcium and vitamin D can affect fracture rates and including hip fractures. Vitamin D insufficiency leads to less calcium absorption, and through this well-recognized pathway of increasing bone turnover, PTH levels, leads to more fractures. A less frequently evaluated but equally important pathway is the impact of vitamin D insufficiency on the musculo aspect of the musculoskeletal system, with decreased muscle performance, particularly in the lower extremities, and increased risk of falls, which of course is the opportunity for fracture. This is Today we will be looking at some of the physiologic changes that occur with aging in the calcium and vitamin D metabolism, the effect of D on falls and on fractures, and then with a few comments on how you go about replacement of these nutrients in a way that's responsible and safe. As we age, our ability to absorb calcium declines, particularly after age 55 to 60. And you'll see that this is true in men and in women. Part of the reason for this is the declining vitamin D status that occurs with aging and the declining number of vitamin D receptors present in the GI tract. Here's an illustration of the kinds of declines that you see in the circulating 25-hydroxy-vitamin D level that occur throughout life. Back. There is a well-recognized inverse association between the parathyroid hormone level and the 25-hydroxy-D, such that when D levels become lower, parathyroid hormone levels start to rise. And this is the illustration that vitamin D is associated with parathyroid hormone. We all know from our beginning medical training that the primary regulator of parathyroid hormone is the circulating calcium concentration, which is affected by calcium intake. So we have both calcium and D affecting parathyroid hormone. This is a very interesting illustration that looks at the relative importance of calcium and vitamin D in regard to their effects on PTH. And the point of this is, in a cross-sectional study, among individuals, healthy adults, who had low 25-hydroxy-D levels, they have the highest parathyroid levels, as expected, compared with the others. But notice that those who have a low calcium intake, defined as less than 800 milligrams, have an even higher parathyroid hormone. And that this would be your most vulnerable segment of the population, those consuming less than 800 and with 25-hydroxy-D levels in the low range. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of what the average calcium intake in Thailand is. It's 300 and 400 milligrams. So I'd say virtually everyone in this area would fall into that intake, into the green bars, and many have low D levels. So there is excess parathyroid hormone circulating in Thailand. Another implication of this is laid out in this rather complicated slide. It's the same concept as the previous one, but instead of looking at parathyroid hormone, we are now looking at femoral neck bone mineral density in groups with the segments with low, moderate, and normal vitamin D levels. And what do you see here? Among those in the lowest quartile of calcium intake, you see lower hip bone mineral density than you do in those with higher intakes. So this is sort of the consequence of that higher parathyroid hormone level that we just looked at. What about the effects of these nutrients on bone mineral density? Next. This is a meta-analysis that looks at studies that examine the effect of calcium in isolation compared with placebo on, in this case, spinal bone mineral density changes. And basically, overall, there is about a little less than 2,000 elders, and there was heterogeneity in the analyses, meaning that you really couldn't put all these trials together. The basis for that heterogeneity, it turned out, was dose. Some doses were effective and others were not. So we explored that and came up with the following findings. When we looked at categorized or grouped the lower dose studies, this means doses of 200 through 600 units per day. There was no effect whatsoever of that dose range on risk of falling. This is certainly consistent with the picture we just saw, where the 600 was not effective, the 800 was. Next. Here is the result in those trials that used higher doses, and that range included 700 to 1,000 units per day. And in this cluster of trials, there was a 19% risk reduction